Good evening from GBN. I'm Kenroy Baptiste. Welcome to Beyond the Headlines for Monday, July 24, 2023. We're live on GBN Television, K105 FM, as well as the Facebook page and YouTube channel of GBN Grenada Broadcasting Network. This evening, the conversation focuses on youth, crime, and violence. To help us unpack the issue, I'm joined on set by Mrs. Elaine Henry-McQueen, Program Coordinator of the EU-UN Spotlight Initiative, and Sergeant of Police Andy St. John, who is attached to the Community Relations Department of the Royal Grenada Police Force. Joining us via Zoom from Trinidad and Tobago is Commander Garvin Heerah, Strategic Security Consultant and Regional Security Expert. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone.
Yes. All right, so the conversation we're zeroing in on youth, crime, and violence, and relative to the Grenada context of things in recent time, this has been, goodness, the topic of conversations, the concern, just so much going on relative to this subject. I want to find out from each of you your reaction to what has been happening in recent time. And when I reach to Commander Heerah, I want to get a sense from you relative to the regional situation as it relates to crime and violence concerning our young people. Let's begin with Mrs. McQueen.
It sometimes felt overwhelming in that several incidents of very significant forms of violence happened in quick succession. And so it gave us pause. It gave me, it caused me to think, what is happening? What's going on? And it's a very uncomfortable feeling. We are in the Spice Isle, we're in a peaceful country, and having these levels of violence in quick succession like this, so many happening within this short space of time, it is worrying.
What say you, Sergeant St. John?
Well, Kenroy, the peace and tranquility of a nation is always very much needed, and we know as to what can happen when the peace and tranquility of a nation is interrupted by violence. And recently, as it has been recognized, we have been having upsurge in the sort of violent crimes that has been happening. And it leaves me with a bitter taste in my mouth, to be honest. I feel very hurt and very much upset to the point that we're having so much young people, young lives, who are getting involved in those sort of incidences. And those sort of incidences, I believe that a lot of those could have been avoided. And so we're losing persons. We're not only losing persons who might have passed because of the violence, but we're losing persons who could be productive and then they are incarcerated for some reason. So we have to take a step and grab this thing by the bootstrap and put a stop to.
Okay. Commander Heerah, from where you sit, of course, you have a regional perspective. You crossing shows, you meeting with the authorities. From where you sit, how do you feel about what's going on across the region?
Yeah, if we were to speak as passionate citizens of the Caribbean tonight, we are echoing the sentiments of the parents, echoing the sentiments of the citizens, echoing the sentiments of some of the experts, the politicians, the law enforcement officers, as to where did this come from? How all of a sudden we have seen this upsurge, this sort of tidal wave of violence that is now gracing our streets and our residential areas, our business places, the social, recreational centers is now being overpowered and dominated by crime, and by violence, most important. You can't have a function as we used to have in the old days on a Saturday night, a party where people will socialize, have a good time, and go back home safely. You are expected that within these social gatherings, that the law enforcement, and I'm sure Sergeant St. John can attest to this, you'll have to deal with about 4 or 5 disturbances, probably confiscate knives, or might be guns and shooting. There's an intention to do violent acts. And when you look at it, my fellow speakers, my fellow panelists are quite correct. It's people at a young age. And where and how has this now transformed itself into our young people? And I am reflecting to you that this is occurring not only in the beautiful Spice Isle of Grenada or the Twin Islands of Trinidad and Tobago, but across the Caribbean region. And my research and my team has drawn down on it to show that we have been victims, and I'm saying victims here guardedly tonight, and even to our viewers and our listeners, and I stand to be corrected, or I stand even to be disputed. But I say victims. We are now victims of a cultural invasion. And our young people are not holding to the traditions and the foundations and what we know as the cornerstones of that social upbringing and molding that we were once, what I'll call, respected for in the Caribbean region. There is a separation. And that takes me to issues like parenting. It takes a village to raise a child. We grew up like that, be it Grenada or Trinidad and Tobago, or that whole commitment by society to treat and to deal with what is known as the next generation. Sergeant St. John was quite correct. These are the future citizens of Grenada, of Trinidad and Tobago, St. Vincent, St. Lucia, Jamaica, Guyana, you name it. The future citizens, the next generation. And if we were to look predictively as what our country is going to look like in 10 years' time, if this thing is not dealt with, and I love the analogy taken by the bootstrap, if we don't address it and address it quickly, we may be a failed state or lost generation. And that's just the opening, guys. There's a lot of stuff to discuss regarding this very sensitive topic.
Absolutely. Mrs. McQueen, why are some young people, the operative word some, because there are a lot of young people who are focused, driven, they are headstrong, and they are making moves to do positive things in their lives. But why are some young people choosing a life of crime?
Let's qualify that a bit quite clearly. When we say people, for the most part, violence is committed by men, whether young men or older men, men and boys, primarily, not only, but primarily are the ones who commit violent incidents against others, whether it's against other men and boys, or against women and girls, or even against themselves, say in the form of suicide. Right? So the question then means that we have to take a look at masculinity. What have our societies been teaching us about what it means to be a man? Right, and when we take that, aside and inspect it, we see things that is grouped as harmful masculinities or toxic masculinities, where men and boys all over the world, not just in the Caribbean, not just in Grenada, but men and boys are learning that in order to be a man, one has to be tough, one has to be stoic or hide their emotions, one has to be prepared for battle. right? And to defend masculinity. And we see that then causing men and boys, a lot of men and boys, to think that violence is okay, that it is fine to use violence in order to get what they want, in order to prove that he is a man, right? Now, it doesn't mean that it is only men and boys who believe this culture, and that culture of violence is there. And we see it in the homes as well. And the idea of parenting is very, very critical, because we have homes, even in Grenada, where using violence and threatening violence is apparently the only way to enforce some sort of discipline. And I say enforce very deliberately, because it's not to instill discipline, it's about forcing someone to obey, you know. So we hear things like, move before break your foot, as common household, a child doing, you know, common household activity, and the parent or guardian might want the child to move to a different part of the house or behave in a particular way. And it's either the strap, some kind of other violent means to hit the child or to threaten the child. And therefore this culture of violence is there.
So you're saying even the way parents communicate with their children relative to basic instructions breeds violence?
It does, because the child is learning. And the child has learned that if I want to get my way, I can either use violence or threaten violence. And the other person will do as I want them to do. And in this culture where it is about getting my way, and we are losing also the ideas around respect for others. As a matter of fact, we need to gain, I don't think we really, really had it, this thing about respect for the rights of others. It's something which we are learning as we go along, right? So we are not yet there about respect for the rights of others, respect for and tolerance of difference of opinions and things like that. And in the absence of those, respect for others and others' opinions and so on, and the use of violence, even in casual conversations, this culture of violence can lead to situations like what we're seeing now. So I'm saying there are individual reasons and factors that can cause somebody to commit violence. But as a society, we have to take a hard look at ourselves and see what we are doing as a society to cause others to think that using violence is a normal thing.
Okay, we'll come back to you in a while. Let's go to Sergeant St. John for the time being. Help us to understand the origin of conflict.
Well, you have situations that may arise where you have disagreement over one matter or the other. And it can be a simple disagreement. It can be a very delicate and serious disagreement. But it's really a disagreement between parties that you have not understanding the other person's point of view or perspective. And so as a result of not understanding or not having an idea as to where the other person is coming from, you have disagreement, you have conflict resulting.
Mm-hmm. So when there's conflict, the next question is, how do we resolve the conflict relative to conflict resolution strategies or skills, for example?
There are different ways of resolving conflicts. For one, you have a situation where you have avoiding, where one or both of the parties can choose to walk away from the conflict or the disagreement. You also have a case where you have avoidance. No, this is what I say, avoidance. You have dominating. So one person can dominate the situation, as in the case of military or police. A person of a senior rank can tell someone of a lower rank to do a certain thing, even if that person may have a perspective that is worth looking at. But the person of a junior rank will still have to do what the senior rank person would have told him to do. So as a result, right there and there, you have that particular issue being set aside, and you can deal with it in a more temperate or in a more calm situation, where you have both persons will really explain now where I'm coming from, and to get an understanding as to what really we should be looking at. You also have a case where you have persons who are, you say, accommodating. The person who have a lesser interest in the conflict can choose to say, okay, you know what? The stake in this is not so great for me, so I can choose to give in, and as a result, let the conflict subside. So we have a peaceful situation resolved.
What I find, though, Sergeant St. John, so you mentioned the person with the lesser stake, more or less, but the person with the greater stake, sometimes I find, tend to listen to people on the sidelines who can often fuel the fire and cause a whole different spin on the conflict getting to another level.
Definitely. And this is where it takes someone of, you have to be thinking. You have to think that, hey, this is not you involved here. This is myself and this other individual. Whatever action I take because of your giving advice on the side, the ultimate responsibility lies with me. So if I engage in brawl or engage in a fight where I do something that is against the law, where I may have caused or inflict injury on another person, the law wouldn't come and say who it is that was inciting you. Let us lock that person up. The law would lock me up, because I'm the one who would have inflicted injury. So there is no need to say somebody else did. So we need to think, we need to look and weigh situations, and not because someone say, you are right, that you should try to enforce and try to win the argument. You give in. At the end of the day, everyone walks away.
Let's bring in Commander Heerah back into the conversation. Commander Heerah, is the education system failing our nation's children?
I'm thankful for that question, because it really ignites a good conversation to look at our educational system. However, before we go there, I want to touch on two things that my fellow panelists would have said. And Mr. McQueen would have also spoken about that culture and the invasion of the culture, as I had alluded to, and speaking about how there has been now a change and reflected on the parenting aspect of it. We are looking at some negligence when it comes to how our young people are being parented. And then we talk about the absenteeism of the male in the family, and the adoption of masculinity, and whether there needs to be violence within the home as to the communication and how we are speaking to each other. But we cannot dismiss also that our present youth, our young generation, have also diverted, have shifted the narrative towards a certain type of behavior and attraction that is out there in social media. When we were younger, even generations just right after us, there wasn't as much exposure in social media for that sort of influence that is driving the agenda of violence. The video games and the music and the patterning and copycatting of what they're seeing in other countries and adopting it as a norm here in the peaceful isles of Grenada and Trinidad and some of the other Caribbean islands. So that is also showing itself, which brings me to the point, just to touch a little bit before I go on to answering your question of what Sergeant St. John was saying. There's something known as the 3 C's when you deal with conflict resolution, which is having that collaboration in order to get to the compromise. So there's a collaborative approach to resolving the conflict, but there's something in the middle, which is competitiveness. There's a competitiveness amongst the 2 parties or 3 to want to win in this conflict, rather than want to share and walk away in a compromise. So there drives a competitiveness that overpowers the collaboration that affects the compromise. So I just wanted to add that. So is our educational system doing enough? I don't think so. I think what we are seeing, based on, as I said in my research, and some of the focus groups that I would have led on, and some of the other aspects I see regionally and internationally, we have become very curriculum-centric, very module-centric, just to get the curriculum completed. So it has become more like a duty than a devotion. And we had teachers before that were inherently invested in the development of our young people. We now have an educational system, and I know some teachers are going to disagree with me, many educationists. I'm also an academic and I lecture at the university level. But I'm telling you, a lot of people are now doing that as a job, as a duty, because they can get to do something else. So they're now teaching, and they're not seeing the elements of depositing to the development of the young people. And come to class or not come to class, it's not my problem. I'm not even interested in whether I see a child or I don't see a child. I am supposed to be here between 8 and 4 to complete a curriculum. We have different learning styles in the region, and I am advocating strongly, asking the question, what happened to our educational and vocational aspects, where a child may not be as in tune academically, but can be in tune towards a trade, towards something practical, towards the arts, towards music. Their hands, for instance. We are not depositing to the development of our children outside of the academic corridor. It's about book and exam only. We need to understand that development has expanded into different learning styles. Entrepreneurship, for instance, needs to be encouraged. But I'm pushing hard that we look through our educational system to reintroduce the vocational schools. Introduce institutions that could contribute to the development of the child outside of the academic learning cycles.
So, Commander Heerah, that competitiveness you talk about in an episode of conflict, for example, is that why we're having unresolved conflicts when it plays up itself?
Yeah, of course, and it's more than just unresolved conflicts. It is conflict that is erupting in violence, because there's a competitive, I want to win. I want to leave the argument having won the fight. So they see the argument and the conflict, just as Sergeant St. John has articulated, as a fight. It's not a literal clash, but they see it as a fight, because we have now, as I said, being invaded. We are possessed by a cultural ideology that is fanning the flames of violence. The kind of music our young people are listening to, the words of some of those songs by our own artists, the exposure to some of the stuff that they're looking at and modeling and patterning and reflecting has gone way beyond our expectations as parents and as gatekeepers today. We have to adjust to be able to treat with that, because it is the new norm.
Mrs. McQueen, there's a school of thought that says you don't have to be arrogant if you're all right. So even if you are right, you don't have to be arrogant about it. What say you about that?
Yeah, that's a very valid school of thought, but one has to be very mature. And one has to also feel safe to be able to use that approach. I say mature and safe because sometimes that is where the difficulty is. One sometimes feel that he or she has to defend their turf, defend their position, defend their masculinity, defend their point to the last, whatever it means, right? And that sometimes leads to conflict. But in order to avoid the conflict or resolve the conflict or use non-violent means to address the problem, all the parties involved need to work in a mature way, treat with it as an issue to be solved, not the person to be attacked, but a problem to be solved, right? And if we can get to that point, then we're able to have meaningful and mature conflict resolution. But in order to do that, we have to also recognize that the people who are to deal with that conflict must also have some level of equality between them and among them, right? Or if it's many people among them. In that, if we were to reflect on what Sergeant St. John said earlier, if one is of a higher rank or status or PowerPoint than the other person, and the other person gives in, it doesn't mean that the conflict is resolved. It might mean that it appears to die for the time being. It is put aside, and sometimes it rears again. And sometimes the unresolved conflicts for the persons who feel that they have lost, and if that happens over and over, then it brews and causes sometimes some level of conflict, some level of violence later on, either against the same person who they felt they have been losing against, or it could be acted out against others who they now have power and control over, right? Now, think of the idea of walking away if there is a conflict, and also think of this notion of masculinity as being macho and strong and stand your ground. For a young man who believes that if he walks away, he will be ridiculed by his peers, will he walk away even if he wants to walk away? No, it would have to mean that he would have to approach this in a very mature way. But can our society as a whole, and this is a question to all of us, can we as a society choose to tell that young man and to tell the peers of that young man, tell the friends and the tutors and the neighbors and everybody who are associated with that young man that we should not ridicule or jeer or tease a young man for choosing to walk away from violence? But in fact, we should encourage more and more of us to do that. That we should choose to see things from other person's perspectives. That we should choose to debate, to discuss things. That we should choose non-violent ways of solving problems. Can our society do that? And can our society do that, particularly so for men and boys? Because primarily men and boys are the ones committing violence. But we need to do that as well. But I'm just saying, for the purpose of this conversation, and of course, because over 90% of the persons in prisons are men and boys, and mainly for violent violent crimes. Yeah, we really need, as a society, to look at ourselves. Yeah. Now, it's a small handful of persons who are actually committing the violence. It's not the majority of us. But are there some of us who are benefiting from the violence that is occurring, even by the few? Are there some of us who are maybe not necessarily benefiting, but we just choose to be silent about it? Can we all come into the picture and teach ourselves as a society to respect each other, to encourage each other to use nonviolence and peaceful resolutions.
We're coming up to a break, but I just want to ask Sergeant St. John, is communication always the answer to resolving a conflict? I ask the question because there are some hot-headed people around, and you might be part of a conflict, this particular individual, for example, be part of a conflict, and that person's goal is to talk the issue out in the interest of resolving the conflict, but the other party isn't open to that kind of resolution. How must the individual proceed?
Communication is the basis, and I would say the bedrock of resolving conflicts. Without communication, there's only one response or one outcome. We having a conflict, two persons having a conflict, and no one is open to talking, no one is open to receiving and listening, then the ultimate outcome would be violence. Because I'm going to hold on to my viewpoint, and you are going to hold on to your viewpoint, and we're going to keep going at it, and we're going to reach a point where blows is going to be had. So communication is the bedrock. Communication is what the underlying factor here in resolving conflict. I may not know the other person's perspective. The other person's likewise may not know mine. But if we understand, if we take the time to listen to the other person's perspective, the other person's viewpoint, then we may realize that why are we even having a conflict? There's no need to have a conflict because now I understand where you're coming from, and now you understand where I'm coming from. So we can clear this up. So communication is the basis for resolving our conflict.
So in instances when both parties don't want to listen to each other, and there is this, for want of a better word, stalemate between them, what is the next approach? Or what should be the next approach? Should we invite a mediator into the mix? Where should we move from there?
Yeah, we should, if given the opportunity, because sometimes it still boils down to the fact that the two parties would have to be willing to have someone come in the middle and try to mediate, try to understand what is really happening. But if that is not being given an opportunity to be had, then we would still end up with the same road that we're going, ending up in violence. So communication, whether it is between the two parties, whether one listening to the other and trying to understand where the other one is coming from, or we both deciding, hey, we cannot resolve this by ourselves, let us get someone else to come in the mix and try to give us a different perspective. It is still communication.
Okay. All right, I follow. All right. Yes. Just go ahead. We take a break.
Just to jump in, that is on the assumption that they want to resolve the conflict, or that they have time to think about communication and the mediator and all of that. What about those serious acts of violence that might occur because of spur-of-the-moment action? Mm-hmm. And then there are also those forms of violence that occur as a result of another act of violence. Right? So we have to also recognize that there are different causes and there are different factors that are involved, and so therefore different options should be made available. One of the challenges that comes from what is now called helicopter parenting or overprotecting a child, yeah, and sometimes by the parents, and also sometimes used in the school where there is the overuse of adult mediation when children have conflicts among themselves. If that is overused, children don't end up learning how to deal with difficulties and challenges themselves. And they can also end up using things that are not appropriate when there isn't an adult nearby to step in, right? And sometimes when they grow up and adults are not expected to step in because they're adults now, they still have not learned all of those things around negotiating a relationship, an interpersonal relationship, or negotiating their way through a problem and things like that. So it's a whole range of issues. Conflict resolution obviously is one of them, and the ability to use official means like mediation and so on would be continually very, very useful. Yeah, but we also have to recognize that the self-efficacy around learning how to approach problems in one's life comes with a lot of experience, and sometimes it starts from growing up since kindergarten, with their siblings and with other school children at 5 years old and 10 years old and so on. Yeah, to learn how to treat with other interactions with so many different people involved.
Right.
And learn that there are different styles and different ways of coping, and that some things you just have to let it go, and it doesn't hurt to just let some things drop.
That's deep. Some things. Yes, we have to take a break at the moment, but Commander Heerah, once we get back from the break, we'll cross to you to continue the conversation. You are watching Beyond the Headlines. We're also live on K105 FM, as well as the Facebook page and YouTube channel of GBN Grenada Broadcasting Network. More to come after the break.
Calypso is alive and well. The Melody Papitet Calypso semi-final is on Sunday, July 30th. Progress Park in St. Andrew from 5 p.m. as we conclude semis weekend. 19 Calypsonians, 2 songs each. The hard-biting lyrics, the peacock, and the kicks on one big stage. Admission $40. It's Kaiso, and Bo Kaiso.
So if me just say you want pizza, to be an people.
Visit www.spicemasgrenada.com for everything Carnival. This Sunday, July 30th, all roads lead to Progress Park. It's the Melody Papitet Calypso semifinals. Who will progress onto the March Gras?
GRENDEC Community Partnership Initiative.
The classrooms that were refurbished as a result of this project really were not conducive to installing ICT into the classroom. Many of the windows were not functional. The security to the actual rooms themselves were insufficient. At the Maribor campus, the roof was also termite infested. The college is extremely appreciative of the contribution of GRENDEC to this project to really enhance learning through the use of information and communications technology.
It's the 4th edition of Hubbard's Live Free for 1 year promotion. Cuatro Punto Cero. It's unbelievably amazing. You can win free fuel, free drinks, cash prizes, free property and vehicular insurance, free cable, TV and internet, free electricity, free coke, free water, free cooking gas, free paint supplies, free passes to Sunshine Promotion events for 2023, free groceries, all for 1 whole year. And every winner receives a lunch package. Be sure to fill out the entry forms and enter it into the marked entry boxes at all Hubbard's departments and at participating outlets. Promotion runs from April 1st to September 30th, 2023. Draws will be held every 2 weeks. Terms and conditions apply.
Welcome back. You're watching Beyond the Headlines. I'm Kenroy, Baptiste, sitting in for Colin Dow this evening. We're talking youth crime and violence. A reminder of the guests. Elaine Henry-McQueen, Program Coordinator of the EU-UN Spotlight Initiative. Next to her in studio is Sergeant of Police Andy St. John. And joining us via Zoom from Trinidad and Tobago, Commander Garvin Heerah, Strategic Security Consultant and Regional Security Expert. I want to stay with you, Commander Heerah. To find it from you, how do we even begin to deal with disruptive students within the school system, for instance?
Yeah, so thanks again for the question. It actually dovetails very nicely to the point that I wanted to close with. And I want to commend my fellow panelists for their contributions, because it is building comprehensively into that whole picture as the treating with the issues of violence and recognizing, wait a minute, it involves our youth and it is taking a corridor of crime. And it's 3 R's. The first one is replay, rejection, and revenge. So replay, what is happening, and it is in fact paralleling with what Elaine McQueen would have said, in that whole aspect of the traditional upbringing and parenting and community-based and village to raise a child aspect for our young people has withered away. And some parents are leaving children to be babysitted by cable TV and by the internet and by devices. As the child starts acting up, they give them a device, and the child knows how to get onto with the technology, onto social media, and they are calm and quiet and looking at a lot of stuff outside there in the University of YouTube. But what has happened in the past, when we were growing up and with some of the other generations right after us, is that we were taught how to lose. We knew how to not win. And we would lick our wounds. We would understand that it didn't work out today. I failed the exam, but we're going to pass tomorrow. But we grew up with a culture and a mindset in how to lose. When a child is losing today, that child, that young person presses replay. That is the concept that is now dominating the young person, the next generation. They are not reaching to the threshold or to the point where they can lose, whether it leads to conflict or not, and be able to recover. So that's where the replay comes in. When a child today is losing, they press replay. They don't want to lose. They go all back to the start and start playing the game all over again. And that has now inoculated itself into the behavior of the child. And then it moves across now to rejection. Are our young people being molded, being taught, being treated, being advised, being educated into deal with rejection? So when we speak about the educational system, we have to move away, as I said, from the walls and the lanes of just the agenda of the module and the curriculum. We have to start teaching some of those softer topics of how you treat with rejection and how you deal with it, because rejection leads to violence. Rejection is encouraged by others to seek revenge. And therefore, men, for instance, who did not have that molding and upbringing and that sort of and, hands around you and the comfort and the shoulder to lean on. Now, when they are treated with rejection, especially in relationships, it ends up in domestic violence and may just end up in a crime of passion and worst case scenario, homicide. So therefore, it's very important for young people, young children, growing up in this Caribbean society to be able to understand, how do I cope with and treat with rejection? If that does not happen, it goes to revenge. And then there are the older ones, Elaine spoke about it, that are benefiting now because of territory, now because of gang warfare, benefiting to encourage young people to seek revenge. And therefore you build that sort of pseudo perimeter of your area, and then the gang warfare, gang association, gang sort of linkage starts to show itself. And what is happening there is really lack of validation. We are not validating our young people. Husbands are not validating their wives, their daughters, their sons, and these children, these people now seek validation elsewhere. And people feed on that. And because they're feeding on that, the individual now is conformed, obligatory now, they are obligated to serve those that they are receiving this pseudo validation from. So it takes us to the question of, is our educational system prepared with and ready to treat with school violence and those some of the issues? Because yes, we went down the road of men and young men and that type of stuff, but guys, we are seeing some violence in the region with young girls, young women, fights. There's an area in Trinidad known as the Movie Town. It's a multi-cinema complex with stores and shopping and restaurants and stuff. This weekend, there was a fight, a gang fight with girls only, teenage girls, violent. So our young girls are also expressing this violence. So it's a sort of pandemic, and I don't want to use that word, but something that has expanded across our region. And therefore, it is also in the schools. And we're seeing the fights in the schools. And the answer to that is not expulsion. The answer to that is not suspension. I am thinking that we need to start exploring some sort of institution that can treat with troubled young people, that can, I use the term guardedly, rehabilitate, restore, and return them towards the normal run-of-the-mill things with education. But they say there are a lot of issues. And if we instill and we inoculate and we talk to them while they're in school and they're with us, be the teachers or the volunteers or the guidance counselors, when they walk out your gates, they're back into the communities. They're back into the lack of parenting. They're back into the gang culture. So there has to be a 360-degree addressing of the issues. And I'm saying we have to now look at an institution that can capture these people, these young people, this next generation, and begin to instill into them some worth, some value, some validation to move them away from that low threshold to think that revenge and violence and crime is the only answer.
Right. Well, it seems to me that the criminal mind is becoming younger. Commander Heerah.
Definitely. And one word there, sophisticated, because some people believe those guys there with the pants dropping over their buttocks and walking around in rubber slippers and think that they can't be doing that, man. They can't be doing that. And we sort of brand them as just ordinary criminals who are the petty thief. Guys, sophisticated. Gangs are recruiting young, bright men and women to be part of their computerized system, moving money, transactions, extortion. You'd be surprised to know how organized these organized crime groups are. It's a well-oiled machine. And therefore, the criminal is a younger criminal, yes, a brighter criminal, and crime has moved away from what we have put in a box as some of the old school traditions. We are now seeing a sophistication in the crime. We're now seeing online and cyber crime. We are now seeing where you can be robbed without a gun being placed in your neck or a knife being placed in your stomach. Somebody could stay right here and rob you of your money or your property based on the technology and cyber crime. And young people, young bright people are being roped in, are being as I said before, recruited to provide that sort of expertise to the criminal circle. But what is happening is that, and this is in no disrespect to Sergeant St. John and all of our law enforcement agencies in the region, no disrespect, but what has happened is that we got caught and we stopped right there. We didn't expand our capacity to treat with a new type of criminal. We didn't expand our capacity to adjust our tradecraft and our tactics to recognize crime has adjusted and shifted on us, while we are still trying to treat with it with old school tactics. To treat with some of the new criminalities, the younger criminal, the brighter criminal, the new aspects of gang warfare, we have to understand that this thing has gone in another direction. And when the environment changes incrementally, our thinking, our planning, and our strategizing needs to change incrementally.
Elaine Henry-McQueen, I want to come to you for the time being relative to how do we begin to redefine masculinity? Because at the moment there's a lot of toxic masculinity around, and it leads to crime and violence.
Yes.
Because, people want to win, not realizing that even if you walk away, it doesn't mean that you are weak necessarily, but you are preserving your own life for the most part. How do we even begin that conversation to redefine masculinity?
Right. First of all, I think we have to get rid of the notion that boys will be boys. And, that's where it starts, where we think we leave boys and men up to their own devices without guidance, without any responsibility sometimes, and think that what quote-unquote wickedness and quote-unquote mischievousness are the same things. So we need to clarify that and recognize that it is not normal or natural for men and boys to be violent. It is something they have learned, and if they have learned it, they can unlearn it. And for those who have not yet learned it, they can learn how to have healthy masculinity instead of the harmful and toxic masculinity. But of course, we have to be able to appreciate that as a society as well. So if we move away from that notion that it is natural or normal for men and boys to be violent, then we can start to consider how to encourage men and boys to express their emotions, to communicate with others without using violence and threats and so on. How to communicate with other men and boys, how to communicate with women and girls, how to reason within themselves in ways that help them develop self-management skills and not rely on others to define who they are, and that they have to prove how strong or masculine or so they are by, being able to win fights and so on, yeah? One of the things we need to also do is to recognize that if there is violence in the homes, family violence, child abuse, and so on, that the children are learning, but they're also hurting. And hurt people hurt others. And so we also now have to very deliberately do a range of things. One of them is to help the guidance counselors in schools and other professionals in that field to help us all heal those traumas from the violence that we would have seen in our lifetimes, whether it was in our homes or among our peers and so on. We need healing, both men and women, because if we were violated, if we experienced violence, abuse, and so as children, we now need to be healed from that so that we can learn to treat with ourselves and with others in a more respectful way. Right, so that's one of the things.
Right. I want to just come in for the time being. Relative to the goings on in the home, you say children are learning, but they are also I want to get a case in point for some context there.
If there is violence in a family, within the family, it might be parents being violent against each other, or it might be a visiting friend violent against the children. One of the children in the household or a set of the children might be experiencing sexual violence by an older relative, and so on. These things, it means that the children are learning the violence that they are experiencing or observing or witnessing, right? But it also means that they are hurting from it, in that they are being traumatized, that their psyche, their mind is growing in a distorted way now, because that hurt, that violence, that abuse they have either witnessed or experienced is reshaping how they think and how they can express their feelings and how they see themselves as human beings, right? And so we have to recognize that if we realize that about 20% of every 100 persons, of every 100 women, right, 20 or 25 of them have experienced sexual violence as a child, right? It means that these 20 to 25 adult women now who experienced violence as a child, who might now be adults raising children of their own, if they had not been healed from the violence that they experienced, that's stress that they went through, they may not be realizing that the harm is being felt by their children.
Okay.
Because they had not something, that trauma can be passed on to the next generation by the ways they act and so on, right? Children who grow up in households where there is intimate partner violence are more likely to commit intimate partner violence or other forms of violence against others in the community. And they're also more likely to accept violence in their lives later on, right? So all of that trauma and hurt that our society has been experiencing from family violence, we need to find ways of helping ourselves to heal that. But we also need to start to prevent that. And that is where our program, the Spotlight Initiative, comes in. And we are working on supporting the Ministry of Social Development and Gender Affairs to expand its parenting program in a way that would help the parents treat with those issues of trauma and family violence and so on, so that they can then use healthier forms of parenting of the children today to prevent that kind of violence from continuing into the future. We are also working with non-governmental organizations like Grenchap and Legal Aid and Counseling Clinic and Sweetwater Foundation and several other NGOs to develop their programs to work with the communities. Men and boys, women and girls, some to do the healing that we're speaking about, and some to do the prevention work, like investigating and redesigning masculinity and reconfiguring masculinity, really, for us in Grenada.
Okay.
We are looking also at we have started working with schools through the Ministry of Education in terms of the Health and Family Life Education program, and introducing more deliberately into the school curriculum issues around respect for others, respect for self, decision making, and so on, in ways that would help the young people act in ways that are non-violent. And so the emphasis I want to leave with us is that while on the one hand we have to treat with the crime that's already occurring and deal with offender accountability and support for victims and so on, we also have to look at prevention prevention from the root causes, so that we will not be perpetually in the cycle of spurts of violence or continuing violence in our communities. We will get to the point of reduction to almost zero, because our society will be thriving on non-violence, thriving on peaceful ways of living, so that we will not be thinking of violence as the most normal thing in the world.
We're coming up to a break, but I just have to ask Sergeant St. John, statistics on offenses involving young people.
Okay, so we would have looked at 4 years. We would looked at 2015, 2020, 2021, and 2022. And there are a host of different offenses. And we're looking at young people age range 11 to 18. And we're looking at offenses such as aggravated assault, attempted rape, causing harm, entering into buildings, dangerous harm, housebreaking, indecent assault, etc. We would have had, between those 4 years, we would have had 475 young persons being involved in one offense or the other. Out of that 475, we would have had 46 females and 429 males. Given a breakdown of about, let's say, 118 persons per year. We would have carrier coup, in terms of a breakdown by the parishes now and the sister isles. Carrier coup would have had 12 persons. St. Andrews, 128. St. David's, 69. St. George's, 184. St. John's, 31. St. Mark's, 24. St. Patrick's, 16. And these are young people, as I say, between the age ranges of 11 and 18. And this is persons who are just starting to live. They are getting themselves involved in criminal activity where the law would have to get involved and bring them to the courts and through the legal means. And young people, I always say to young people, try. Do not allow yourselves to become involved in activities that are unlawful, where you would find that you would break the law and have yourself obtaining a record. When you would have obtained a record, a lot of things, a lot of opportunities that would have been open to you have not you getting that record would be lost.
It becomes a stain on your character, right?
Yes, because there are certain jobs you would not be able to take. Certain travel, you may want to travel, and you cannot go to certain countries, or you cannot travel. You cannot get employment, for instance, cruise ships. Persons need to take stock, young people need to take stock of their lives and try to ensure, by whatever lawful means, prevent themselves from getting involved or entangled with the law where they would obtain a record.
Yeah. Talk about that. We have to take a break, but I often ask, how can we diffuse? There's a conflict, it's ripe, it's fraught with drama. How do we get to the point where we begin to diffuse it as best we can and not add fuel to the fire? But we'll continue the conversation right after the break. You're watching Beyond the Headlines here live from GBN. Stay with us, more to come after these words.
particular pain that no one can find a solution for? Are you tired of taking meds for joint and other pains? Hills and Valley Medicare Center on Grenville Street, St. George is here to help you heal. We will help you map a path to your full recovery. Visit us Monday to Saturday for a consultation with our on-site doctor, physiotherapist, and massage team. You will be glad you did. Our Medicare Center, a proud member of the Hills and Valley group of companies. On the hilltop or in the valley, we are with you wherever life takes you. Hills and Valley Pharmacy. Your health is our business.
Freedom is driven to pursue that passion that keeps you up at night and makes you smile in your sleep. Freedom is bold to embrace the possibilities that can open up your world and conquer new heights. Freedom is fabulous, with bits and pieces that enhance the quality of your life. Freedom is what you do with the flexibility to change path or direction when you need to. Freedom breeds ambition and purpose while having loads of fun along the way. But most of all, freedom is well-deserved for the road traveled and the journey still to come. Unleash your freedom with Nexa Credit Union. Offer ends August 31st, 2023. Call us on 440-1354 or visit our website to pre-apply. Apply now. Freedom awaits.
Rembek Community Partnership Initiative.
The classrooms that were refurbished as a result of this project really were not conducive to installing ICT into the classroom. Many of the windows were not functional. The security to the actual rooms themselves were insufficient. At the Maribor campus, the roof was also termite infested. The college is extremely appreciative of the contribution of GrenLec to this project to really enhance learning through the use of information and communications technology.
We're back here on Beyond the Headlines. We're live from the Grenada Broadcasting Network. Henry Baptiste sitting in for Colin Dow. The phone line is open, 440-1252. Feel free to connect with us. Feel free to chime in. We're talking youth crime and violence. In the meantime, I want to return to Commander Heerah. He's via Zoom from Trinidad and Tobago. Commander Heerah, diffusing a conflict. I want to talk about that because no doubt it's a delicate matter, because sometimes, you know, a bystander may want to show some support, to put some peace into the mix, but if that person isn't careful, that person can lose his or her life regrettably.
Yeah. What we are seeing, and this is based on research and actually being on the ground, and I will talk a little bit about that after, is that there is a reluctance now to get involved. There is a sort of stay away because I don't want to become part of what is taking place. Before, there was an attitude and again, that big word, culture. There was a societal sort of approach for intervention, be it two neighbors, family members, husband and wife, or two strangers in the street. Because of how we had this love for each other, we would have intervened. But now there's a reluctance, a resistance. Nobody wants to get involved, handle their business. And that's sort
Commander Heerah, I have to stick a pin there for the time being. We have a caller coming in. That person may be on his or her cell phone. So I'll come back to you shortly. Your live caller, go ahead.
Yeah, good night, and good night to your guests. I want to preface my contribution by a quotation that says, keep in mind always the present you are constructing. It should be the future you want. And that is by someone by the name of Ola, spiritual leader from the East. I say that because for some years now, we've been constructing a future or a present that is coming back to haunt us. A number of things we have done. We have dismantled the society and promoted individualism. There's no sense of community. We don't tell our children, any stories anymore in terms of that could inspire them. Our children are on their own, by and large. I mean, we ourselves are violent. We don't like to admit that. There's something called unconscious bias, which we don't really take a hold of. There's so many things that I could talk about as somebody who, and I think the person from Trinidad was on a webinar at my organization stage in January, and a lot of things came out of it. But even this radio station refused to really have anything to do with it. So I'm saying to you that there are many things we could do as a people, but we don't do it. We back, we talk, we do song bites, and then the problem exacerbates. For years I've been warning people that if we don't be careful, Lavantil and Mova will come here. And it's almost here now.
All right. Thank you, caller. Thank you so very much indeed. All right. Yes, so Commander Heerah, you can pick up where you stopped.
Yeah, well, I want to compliment the caller for what he said, and he's quite truthful. We've lost the traditions of the upbringing and the depositing positively into the lives. And because of that, we're now reaping the issues of our negligence. And he's quite correct. We have an old saying in the Caribbean, when your neighbor house is on fire, wet yours. And you're seeing the type of violence in Jamaica, you're seeing the type of violence in Trinidad. So Sweet Grenada and Carriacou has to recognize it's just a matter of time. Sooner or later, this thing is going to be on our shores. What are we doing in the concept of prevention? But more importantly, along the lines of what Ms. McQueen would have said, it is not just the programs and the systems that we're trying to install and instill and implement in the schooling system and in communities, but is our BCP. What is our business continuity plan to see this thing continued throughout? It's not a start and stop. It's not just to look good statistically. And therefore, go back to your question that spoke about conflict. I was taking the angle of there's a reluctance now to get involved. Handle your stuff on your own. And the reason for that is that you can get killed for getting involved. You can get killed because you maybe seem to be favoring one end of the spectrum in a conflict, especially if it is on the underpinning of gang warfare or territorialism, which is what is happening in the region. So people pull back, they see something, they don't say anything about it, they close their doors, kill each other outside there if you have to, but I am not getting involved because we are banking now on self-preservation as our first line of defense, where we would have gotten involved before. We're not doing that again because you can get killed, your life can be on the line, or your children's lives can be on the line because they would have extended that threat towards your family and your relatives. That is what is happening to our country. I wanted to make one other point.
Okay,
and that point is
a caller's just come into us. A caller just come into us. So we enter the interactive part of the program, so calls will be coming in quite quickly.
Oh, I didn't know that. Sorry about that.
No problem. All right, so call online, you're live.
Yes, Kenroy, good evening, and good evening to all involved. Kenroy, I've been, listening over and over to all these presentations, all this talking, but it seemed to me that we do not want solution. Because there is a solution. But that is the solution that we are avoiding, deliberate or otherwise. We seem to be avoiding that solution. Now, as a child growing up, we were taught to pray. The Bible was read in the home. Children respected God. I'm sure you must have, as growing up, you must have heard the statement, but if it wasn't for God, you heard that in many conflicts. When somebody threatened another, they say, if it wasn't for God, I would have do you this. But because of that God concept, that God consciousness, that God awareness, there was not so much violence, or the kind of violence that we are seeing now. So the problem with the humanity is we need to turn back to God. We need to teach our children to pray. We need to teach them that it's a God who created them and they did not evolve. So they have values and that God is looking out for them. God knows everything about them and that God loves them. We're not teaching our children about God anymore. So we...
Okay, thank you so much, caller, for your contribution. Elaine, Henry-McQueen, the family. Let's talk a bit about the family, because there's major difficulty relative to the upbringing of children, and you see that part which is often repeated, do as I say and not as I do. I think this is just confusing our young people.
Yes, it is. It does confuse children. It confuses adults. The family is very important in the ways in which a child thinks and would grow up to be, right? The family is the first place the child learns how to deal with other people, how to communicate, how to deal with themselves, what to expect from the world. That's what the family does for the child. Before the child even thinks of school or church or anything else, it's the family. And it is important then for the family to be a safe space and a healthy place for all family members, the fathers, the mothers, the grandparents, the children, the cousins, anybody in that household or anybody who has this familial relationship. And so we're really encouraging peaceful families. That's the main thing.
Mm-hmm. We have a call online. Caller, go ahead. Caller, you're live.
Yes, good evening.
Yes.
I want to endorse the last caller, but I want to also say that we talk about violence, and it seems as though the world has evolved where we are putting children in a situation where they have two male parents or two female parents, and I am wondering whether that situation is abusive more than any other. Also, do we have a situation where young people, when they're showing tendency to violence, where we can take them to some place to deter them from telling them where they're going to reach, so that would act as a deterrent to them so that they refuse to continue to follow violence?
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I want to get your perspective, Sergeant St. John and Commander Heerah. So in Grenada, we have the Grand Baccalaureate Juvenile Rehabilitation and Treatment Center. Yes. The Prime Minister has said in recent time that, in other words, he doesn't support sending our young people there from quote-unquote minor errors or mistakes. I want to get your feedback on that perspective.
Yeah, the family,
and how we can move forward.
Yeah, the family should work in a way to help regulate children and each other, that they should learn how to manage their own emotions and their responses to things. Institutionalization is never meant to be the first option. It is supposed to be the last resort. So any institution, and therefore we cannot have multiple institutions like this all over the place for every time a child misbehaves. What we need to do, and what the Spotlight Initiative supported by the EU and the UN are doing, is to encourage healthy parenting, more positive parenting, in ways in which that parents can learn how to prevent conflicts with their children, how to teach their children in ways that help them learn discipline, help them develop and grow into adults who can work with each other in healthy ways, recognizing that conflicts will occur, difficulties will occur. The challenge sometimes is how to deal with them as an individual. And if parents are taught those skills, then they can pass it on to the children, and the children can learn. So that in the households, parents and guardians can discipline the children without leaving it up to them and throwing their hands up in the air for every little thing. Parents have a role, parents and guardians, and that is the first place. The second place would be in the schools, because the teachers and the guidance and counseling officials and so on would also have a role to play in helping children manage themselves and teaching them in a more formal way. And And these are spaces where all of this can resolve. Now, if a situation goes beyond what a parent could handle or the school could handle, then it gets into the court system. There might be other means of, within the juvenile justice system, there are ways in which they can help the child. Going to an institution ought to be the very last resort.
The last resort.
The very last resort.
Okay. All right. Feel free, Sergeant St. John, to share your perspective on how our young people who find themselves in conflict with the law must be treated as a first approach.
Well, I love what Ms. McQueen would have said. Having institutionalized children as a first resort should not be a first resort. The home, we need to definitely start from the home. But we also need to recognize that there are certain things that what we would have grown up knowing as authority from home, some of the authority has been taken away, if you want to say that. There are certain things that would look at now as violence, even within the home, that a parent may try to discipline a child, but how you discipline that child is important. What you do is important. Things that you could have done years back, you can't do it now because it is looked at differently. So as a result of this, we have a certain lapse where the children are getting away with things now that children before would not have gotten away with. And so you have this coming up now where children are getting involved in situations where they are getting entangled with the law before they even know that, okay, this is wrong. So there are other ways that we can channel our children's energy and cause them to correct behaviors that society would deem as negative. One of the things that they can do is, okay, you misbehave, you don't like sports, but I'm going to assign you to a basketball team or a cricket team so that you can gain some level of discipline there through submitting yourself to the authority of the coach or the team. So you would not come out of that knowing that, hey, I can do as I please whenever I want. Because I have learned some form of discipline through subjecting myself to that particular authority.
Okay, right. Commander Heerah, institutionalizing minors, the impact of that from where you sit.
Yeah. I'm in agreement with my two fellow panelists, and I am reflecting on the word of God. In the book of Proverbs tells us, grow up your child in the ways of the Lord, so that when he grows to be an adult, he will not walk away from it. I'm not allegorizing, but words to that effect. Grow up your child in the ways of the Lord, so that when he gets to be an adult, he will not walk away from it. So the instilling and the grounding starts there. So we understand the importance of family. But regarding institutionalizing, I don't want you to lose the context that I'm speaking about. I'm not talking about a correctional institute or a YTC, a youth training complex as we have here in Trinidad and which is jail for young people. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that we have to also understand that violence, that mentality, that attitude of our young people is changing drastically. And there is a call and a need for something to come up in the middle because parents themselves need help. Yes, Ms. McQueen spoke about some of the programs and working with the parents, and it starts there, and instilling the values. And Sergeant and Dawn talked about the discipline and sports. Very good, very good. But there are extreme cases where some children needs to go through some sort of restructuring and remolding of their minds so that they are exposed to other aspects of discipline and learning, but not in the system or the context or what I'll call walls and roof of a correctional institute, but an institute that addresses their issues, whether they be victims of abuse, the victimologies, whether there are issues there that these children have faced and needs that sort of counseling and support in order to move them out of their present state. That is also a support to the parenting. The parents can do a lot. Yes, they can. They can mold. We can grow up the child in accordance with the word of God. But there comes a time when that child walks away, don't walk with. And you need a professional system. If we don't build out on those capacities, when we get to the point of an emergency, when we get to the point of a crisis, we can't now look to scramble to try to put something in place. We have to understand that there are consequences that we are seeing where these young people are growing up where there's no value for life, there's no value for their life and for others, and it's a don't care attitude. We have to be able to reassemble them, corral them back into something that can work towards remolding the minds of the next generation. If we don't do that, we're going to lose them, because the parents can do so much, the schools can do so much, Spotlight can do so much, but there comes a time when we have to be able to house them into some area that can reintroduce that discipline, that approach, nationality, volunteerism, you name it. And countries have to start looking at that. You know, in some countries we have the scouts, we have the cadets, we have youth camps, all of those vocational aspects. Those are some of the things we have to now kind of replan, re-strategize to see how we can address with it. The involvement and the role and responsibility of faith-based organizations is integral. We're not seeing that involvement of the faith-based organizations. We're not seeing so much as we would like to see the churches and the involvement in communities. It's not getting people to come to church, it's taking the church to the people and the values of that sort of upbringing, walking the streets again, meeting the young men, the young women, and being able to take that fellowship and evangelism into the children. And I don't mean evangelism that you're trying to convert people. I'm talking about the evangelism where you're trying to rescue people. And the faith-based organization plays a very good role in that aspect of the recovery.
Commander Heerah, you mentioned the involvement of the faith-based organizations playing a role, but sometimes I feel that some of these organizations have washed their hands from the deviant behavior for young people.
Of course, they've reflected to how I answered the question, a reluctance and a resistance. I'm not going to get involved. I'm not going to get involved with the young people. We don't want them in our church. We don't want them here. Leave them there at the block. Leave them in that territory. Leave them in that thing. We are seeing that, and that's why I'm saying we need to come out of our faith-based organizations and walk back the communities, walk back the streets, get into the areas. I'm not going to dismiss it tonight of also speaking of some of our political representatives, those who are out there supposed to be representing our people. Politically, they will cross rivers and climb hills when it's time for elections to lift up babies and stand there for the photo ops. So I'm saying that same approach that you use within the constituencies have now also been to use to get to the youth. Encourage that system at the community level, encourage that system at the constituency level, to reach out and to be there, because the youth don't have someone connecting and valuing and reaching out to them. So they are reaching out to those who are reaching out to them, and that is the gangs, the gang leaders who are providing and filling the gap. That's the whole aspect of patrimonialism. That's the next conversation by itself. When the state has turned its back on society, society looks at something else to provide, and that includes the young people, that includes the next generation. Patrimonialism tells us our state is turning its back, and the young people is looking at something else to provide the support.
Looking for a sense of belonging and identity at times. All right, let's get some closing comments from the guests. All right, so feel free in your closing comments if you want to recommend a solution to this complicated situation we're in at the moment.
So, the closing comment is that we should look at it from all sides. The problem of violence in our communities, we need to look at it from all sides. we need to also recognize that it is not just a problem of the youth and by the youth, but that it is for all of us, the entire society. And in fact, there are persons way beyond the age of that youth that are also committing violence against others all the time. So let us all come together as a society to look at this problem of violence as we have started, that we pay attention to holding offenders accountable. So it means the law enforcement and the punishment, and so that goes with criminal behavior, those should continue. That we also need to pay attention to supporting survivors and victims and their families and restitution and making sure they're okay in the short term as well as in the long term. And that is important, right? But we also need to pay attention to prevention. What are the causes of the violence? And I started this evening by pointing out to us that one of the causes of the violence from the root, especially this notion of men's use of violence against other men and boys, men's use of violence against women and girls, and men's use of violence against their own selves, their own bodies. We need to pay very close attention to this. Look at masculinities, encourage our men and boys to use less aggressive and harmful ways of treating with themselves and treating with others. That men and boys need to learn what we have come to call the soft skills, the skills of communication, the skills of reflection, the skills related to being calm, even in situations of crisis, that they don't need to defend their turf and defend masculinity and prove that they could use violence to be a man. Right? So we're asking our society to rethink masculinity that way and teach our men and boys those kinds of skills and habits and attitudes that allow them to walk away from conflict without feeling that they're surrendering their manhood. Teach men and boys, allow men and boys to reason with others without feeling that somehow they are, that they're letting down other men, all right? So that men and boys can also learn how to treat with conflict and how not to use conflict and violence in their lives. And so with that, I'm really encouraging us that this, in the long run, it will take time. Prevention always takes time. But we must start somewhere deliberately, and it will bear fruit. I'm quite positive that it will.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sergeant St. John, your closing words.
I want us to go back to the basis where the Bible would have said, if I would go there, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I would like for young people to really examine themselves and understand that what you do unto others is likely to be done to you. So if you show love, if you show respect, if you show tolerance, you're likely to get back these. Grenada is still a beautiful place. It's still a very peaceful place compared to a lot of the others. Let us love each other. Let us love this country that we have been so fortunate to be placed on as the inhabitants of this country. Let us show the visitors the love that we are known for. Let us be peaceful. In this season that we are in, Carnival season, let us have peace, love, tranquility, tolerance, being the watchwords, knowing that from the Royal Grenada Police Force perspectives, there will be a zero tolerance for violence and having offensive weapons in your possession at shows and different activities. Let us be our neighbor's keeper. Let us watch for our brother. Let us watch for our sister. Let us help and pull up persons who may not be, abiding or not be going in a lawful direction. Let us try to have our conflicts, let us have our disagreements resolved in peaceful manner. If there is something that is happening and you figure that it would lead to a conflict, get the law involved, get the police involved. We will take it from there.
Yes, because the truth is you can respect someone even if you don't agree with him or her. Commander Heerah, you have the last words. Go ahead.
It's been a pleasure tonight for this conversation. I want to commend my two panelists for their contributions tonight. And I just want to quote something from an unknown source and then give a solution. And it says here, let's strive to build a future where our youth can truly rise, where education lights their path and ambition is their guide. We can shape a better tomorrow with community in view, uniting in our efforts to a Caribbean that is renewed. And I wanted to let that sink in a little bit. The solution that I am offering is that we have seen here recently a lot of forums with CARICOM. I'm saying right now, CARICOM, and I want to compliment GBN tonight for igniting this conversation, because it's across the region, it's been transmitted, we know that. But CARICOM, most importantly, needs to prioritize the aspect of youth and violence. And what is needed, and I strongly advocate that someone out there listen to what I'm saying, is the establishment of a center of excellence for youth. And let that be a model that is on the ground in all of our Caribbean states, funded by a joint approach by our foreign counterparts, maybe some of those platforms that Mrs. McQueen is representing tonight, or the US, some of the big brothers that want to see development in the region, then start by the development of the youth. And let us establish a center of excellence for the youth that can deal with developing the skills in our culture, in our arts, vocationally, moving and transforming the minds of the next generation, scenarios and simulated training, and getting our youth involved. So we have a center of excellence where there are a number of activities that they can participate in, they can go to, and there's fun and learning and development. And in each country in the region, we can have a platform, the establishment, the center of excellence for the youth, and it can be related, culturally applicable to our young people. That can capture some of the issues that we're dealing with and start remedying some of the solutions that was discussed from all angles tonight. So I speak directly to CARICOM tonight. Think about moving in a direction with support for the establishment of a center of excellence for the youth in all of our countries, so that our young people, our young generation, the next generation, the next leaders of the Caribbean can be secured, can be safe, and can rid themselves of the violence that is inoculating their mindset and the ideology. GBN and the supporting crew and the team, the management, those behind the scenes, thank you very much for allowing me this contribution, for allowing me the opportunity to speak, and for the involvement in a very good discussion tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Commander Garvin Heerah, Strategic Security Consultant and Regional Security Expert via Zoom from Trinidad and Tobago. On set here at GBN, Mrs. Elaine Henry-McQueen, Program Coordinator of the EU-UN Spotlight Initiative. I want to just say this here, now relative to you, Mrs. McQueen. You've done a lot for Grenada. I see you. I applaud you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Next to her is Say it again.
Looking for many more to join, and thank you for the support as well.
Yes, yeah, I'm giving you flowers now, not waiting until another story. No, while you're alive and well, receive your flowers, and I celebrate you. Next to Elaine Henry-McQueen is Sergeant of Police Andy St. John. Thank you, sir, for appearing on the program. He's, of course, attached to the Community Relations Department of the Royal Grenada Police Force. Keep on keeping on, sir. Thank you for your contribution to Beyond the Headlines.
Thank you for having me.
All right, that's our show this evening. I'm Kenroy, Baptiste, sitting in for Colin Dow. Thank you for having watched and listened to the broadcast. Those of you, of course, who chimed in and provided, of course, your contribution, thank you as well for doing so. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
We'll see you again. From Grand Mall.